Hey, what's up everybody? Welcome back to Kickin' Bass TV. Today's video, gonna be talking about the summer to fall transition, talk about where bass are moving to right now, how you'll know what's happening in your area, and then we'll talk about lure selection. So do me a favor, hit that subscribe button down below. Let's go. All right, guys, so today we're talking about the summer to fall transition. Essentially, this is the time of year where all those bass you've been consistently catching in the same summer locations day in and day out kind of just disappear overnight, and it can be a frustrating time of year if you don't know what's happening, when and where to look for them, and what to throw this time of year to catch them. So before we get into lure selection, we'll talk about the two key factors that are gonna let you know when it's happening for you in your part of the country, because there's not really any set date on the calendar, but it is gonna happen at different times of year. If you live up north, you tend to get into colder temps before the rest of us, putting you a couple of weeks ahead. If you live down south, obviously it's warmer a little bit longer, meaning you will be a couple of weeks behind the rest of us. Now, either way, there's going to be two main factors that are going to key you in on when it's happening for you. The first factor is going to be shorter hours of daylight, meaning essentially that the sun is rising later and setting sooner. The second factor is going to be a consistent drop in overnight temps. Now, even if your afternoon temps get back up in the 80s or 90s, the first few nights in a row where you have a 10 to 15 degree drop, and the first couple hours in the morning fishing you feel like you have to have a sweatshirt on, that's the beginning of the fall transition. So where are these bass moving to? Well, there are going to be two distinct groups. First are the bass that stayed up shallow around areas of shade and cover for the summer. They're going to start to vacate those shallow flats, move to areas where they can find thicker vegetation, access to deep water edges where they can start to push bait fish for the fall. Now, those bass that stayed out suspended mid-column in deeper water for the summer, they're actually just going to essentially stay where they're at until the thermocline starts to mix, but they'll actually start to group up tighter, which will make them essentially easier to catch, and then it will become a game of just covering water, finding where they're grouping up over those offshore anomalies, rock beds, and things like that, and then picking them apart with your finesse techniques. So let's talk about lure selection. When it comes to lure selection this time of year, I typically like to start and end my days in the low light hours with reaction baits. Bass are out feeding during those times, so I'll go with things like a whopper plopper. One of my favorites, top water style, is a mini buzz bait, and then honestly, year round I'll throw a lipless, but especially during the fall transition, you can mimic a bait fish profile with this, and it's versatile enough to fish anywhere in the column. After that, I typically go anywhere from a shallow to a deep diving crank, because this is the most efficient way to effectively cover water this time of year and locate those transitioning bass. Typically after that, once the 8:30, 9 o'clock hour rolls around and the sun is starting to pop up, that's when I will switch from my reaction baits to things that are more swim bait profile based. Now, this can be anything from a spinner bait with a swim bait trailer on it to my underspins, which are super effective this time of year. I like to throw the 6th Sense Divine underspin, things like the Owner Flashy Swimmer, and then I'll throw just an exposed hook, plain swim bait on a jig head like this with a 4.3, or in the case that I have a smaller bait fish, a downsized profile is perfect for those of you that have a large shad population in your waters. If you don't have shad population, which is typical a lot of waters out here in Colorado specifically, I'll go with a swim jig and a bluegill profile, which is really tough to beat during the summer or the fall. Then of course, really tough to compete with a soft jerkbait or fluke style bait this time of season, because you can rig this weightless and just kind of slow roll this thing anywhere that you want effectively. Go with something like a grub that's also great at mimicking a bait fish profile. You can throw this on a Ned rig, have an exposed hook, or throw it Texas rig, and it's great for smallmouth or largemouth. Then I get into my bigger swim bait game from there. Now, this can be anything from one of my hand poured soft plastic swim baits like this here, which is killer from the summer to fall transition all the way through the fall as fish start to feed up on big snacks like that. And then because of that same reason, I will throw a lot of glide baits, swim baits, things like that with a realistic profile that I can either slow roll out in the deep, subsurface, top water style, or I can let it float down into the column. This is a super slow sinking bait, so kind of lends itself to multiple applications of fishing. After that, I tend to slow things down to pick those suspended bass apart with my finesse techniques. Things like a shaky head are great to drop over those suspended grouped up bass. This is also a great thing to utilize around those edges and drop off points where those transitional bass are hanging out just waiting to push fall bait fish. Then another great tool this time of year is a jig. This is something that you can throw year round, but during this time of year I'll downsize. I'll take our craw, I'll rip that body in half like that, and then basically just run that on there. Got those great screw lock keepers on these 6th Sense finesse jigs. That's an awesome profile this time of year. So you can work this the same way as that shaky head. You can drop these over those suspended grouping bass that are getting into that fall pattern, or you can work it along those ledges and drop offs and find those transitional bass that are waiting to push bait fish, like we said. And then last but not least, one of my year-round go-tos, a Texas rig craw. Now I like to throw these weightless even through the fall transition, but most of the year I will throw a little 1/4 ounce or 1/8 ounce bullet weight in front of that and peg that, and that is a fish catcher all year long. So hopefully this video will help you guys get into the fall transition bass fishing, increase your numbers, and have a little more confidence this time of year when those bites drop off, not to give up, to stick with it, because fall and winter bass fishing can be some of the best bass fishing of your life. You can catch some absolute giants if you stick to it, especially getting out there and throwing those big profiles.
That's going to do it for today's video. If you guys enjoyed it, do me a favor and hit that like button for me. Make sure you subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell, because that will keep you up to date with all our new video releases and giveaways. Until next time, guys, I'm D with Kickin' Bass TV.
Subscribe.